a glass slipper on a staircase, a spinning wheel in a tower, a dark path to grandmother's house. These are the sweet, simple images of the stories we grew up with, tales as comforting as a warm blanket. They're the foundation of so many childhoods, stories of good triumphing over evil, of true love's kiss, and of happily ever afters. But what if I told you the versions you know are pale, sanitized imitations of the originals? That behind these bedtime stories lie tales of brutality, betrayal, and events so shocking they had to be rewritten. What if I told you that the real stories are less about magical kingdoms and more about the grim realities of the world they came from? Today, we're not just reading between the lines. We're peeling back the comforting layers to reveal the forgotten events and ancient myths that forever changed the stories you thought you knew. This is the truth behind our most beloved bedtime stories. And I promise, after this, you will never look at happily ever after the same way again. Before we get to the gruesome details, we need to get one thing straight about where these tales came from. Long before they were bedtime rituals, they were folktales, passed down orally from one generation to the next. And they weren't meant to be soothing. They were meant to be warnings. In a time when the world was a much harsher, more dangerous place, these stories were tools for survival. They were entertainment, sure, but they were also about moral instruction and preserving cultural values. For centuries, these tales were part of a rich oral tradition. Each time a story was told, it would shift and change, adapting to the teller and the audience. It wasn't until collectors like Charles Perrault in 17th century France and later Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm in 19th century Germany that these stories were finally written down. But here's the crucial part. These collectors weren't initially writing for kids. The Brothers Grimm, for example, saw themselves as cultural and linguistic historians. Their goal was to preserve the authentic folk culture of the German people, which included all the dark, violent, and frankly disturbing themes that reflected the brutal realities of medieval life. These tales were filled with famine, poverty, and the very real dangers that lurked just outside the village walls. Their original purpose was often to instill discipline through fear. A common misconception is that the Grimms traveled the countryside, gathering stories from peasants around a campfire. The reality is, the vast majority of their stories came from literate, educated young women from the middle class who they knew personally. Over time, especially during the Victorian era, a new concept of childhood innocence began to take hold. The idea of protecting children from the world's harshness became popular, and so the stories began to change. They were scrubbed clean, sanitized, and softened. The goriest details were cut, and happy endings were tacked on. And then, of course, came Disney, an empire built on the very idea of the perfect, family-friendly, happily ever after. Today, it's the Disney versions that define these centuries-old tales for most of us. But the old stories are still there, lurking in the archives. And they paint a very, very different picture. So let's start with a girl in a very famous red hood. You know the story. A sweet girl in a red cloak is sent to take goodies to her sick grandmother. On the way, she meets a charming wolf, naively tells him where she's going, and the wolf takes a shortcut. He gets to the house, gobbles up Grandma, puts on her nightgown, and waits. When Red arrives, we get that famous dialogue. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have! What big eyes you have! And finally, what big teeth you have!" To which the wolf replies, "All the better to eat you with," and swallows her whole. But just in time, a heroic woodcutter cuts the wolf open, saving both Little Red and her grandmother, who are miraculously fine. It's a clear lesson about stranger danger, wrapped in some light suspense, but ultimately, everyone is safe. But what if I told you that in the original story, there is no hero, there is no woodcutter, and the wolf's plan is far more depraved than just eating them? The earliest written versions, like Charles Perrault's from 1697, were already darker. His story ends right after the wolf eats the girl. That's it. The moral, he explicitly states, is a warning to young women to beware of charming men, whom he calls the most dangerous wolves of all. But even Perrault's version was a cleaned-up take on the oral folktales that had been circulating for centuries. Stories like the story of grandmother. And this is where things get truly messed up. In these older traditions, the wolf, sometimes an ogre or a werewolf, asks the girl which path she will take, the path of pins or the path of needles. She chooses the slower path, giving the wolf time to get to the grandmother's house. He kills the grandmother, but he doesn't just eat her. He prepares a meal. He carves her flesh and puts it in the pantry. And he collects her blood in a bottle and places it on a shelf. When the little girl arrives, the wolf, disguised as her grandmother, tells her, "There is meat in the pantry and wine on the shelf. Eat and drink, my child." And she does. The little girl unknowingly cannibalizes her own grandmother. In some versions, a cat tries to warn her, crying out, "Slut! To eat the flesh and drink the blood of your grandmother?" But the wolf chases it away. After her horrific meal, the wolf tells her to undress and join him in bed. As she takes off each piece of clothing, she asks, "Where shall I put this?" Each time, the wolf replies, "Throw it into the fire, my child. You will not need it anymore." She is symbolically shedding her identity, her civilization, and her life. She then gets into bed and has the familiar conversation about his hairy body and big mouth. But in these versions, there is no last-minute rescue. He eats her, and that is the end of the story. The girl is dead. It was a brutal, terrifying cautionary tale, reflecting a world where predators were real, and a moment of naivety could easily lead to a violent death. The horror was the point. Of all the bedtime stories, Cinderella is the ultimate rags-to-riches fantasy. Thanks to Disney, we all know the story of a kind girl tormented by her wicked stepmother and stepsisters. Denied a trip to the royal ball, her fairy godmother appears, turns a pumpkin into a carriage, and gives her a gorgeous gown with glass slippers. She charms the prince, flees at midnight, and leaves a slipper behind. The prince searches the kingdom. The slipper fits, and she's swept away to live happily ever after. This version is based heavily on Charles Perrault's telling from 1697, Cinderella. Perrault introduced the magical elements like the pumpkin, the fairy godmother, and those famous glass slippers. But there's a much older and far more brutal version, collected by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. Their tale, Aschenputtel, is a story steeped in body horror and biblical-style retribution. In the Grimm's version, there's no fairy godmother. Cinderella's magic comes from a hazel tree she plants on her mother's grave, watered by her tears. A little white bird in the tree throws down whatever she wishes for. When the prince begins his search for the woman who fits the golden slipper, he arrives at Cinderella's house. The first stepsister takes the slipper into her room, but her foot is too big. Her mother hands her a knife and says, "Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you will no longer have to go on foot." So she does, squeezes her foot into the shoe, and hobbles out. The prince is fooled and rides off with her. But as they pass the hazel tree, two little birds call out, "Rook-de-ghoul, rook-de-ghoul, there's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. This is not the right bride." The prince looks down, sees the blood streaming from her foot, and returns in horror. The second stepsister tries her luck, but her heel is too big. So her mother gives her the same advice: "Cut a piece off your heel." The sister mutilates her foot and fools the prince. Once again, the birds expose the lie. The prince finally asks for the dirty little kitchen maid, Aschenputtel. She is called. Her foot fits the slipper perfectly, and the prince recognizes his maiden. But the story doesn't end there. The Grimms demanded brutal, poetic justice. On Cinderella's wedding day, the two stepsisters attend, hoping to get on the new queen's good side. As the procession begins, the birds from the hazel tree descend and peck out one eye from each sister. Later, as they leave the church, the birds return and peck out their remaining eyes, leaving them blind for the rest of their lives as punishment for their wickedness. There is no forgiveness. There is no forgetting. There is only pain and mutilation. This wasn't a story about just wishing on a star. It was about endurance and a dark, bloody, unflinching form of justice. A princess named Aurora is cursed by the evil fairy Maleficent. On her 16th birthday, she will prick her finger on a spindle and die. A good fairy softens the curse to a deep sleep, broken only by true love's kiss. Despite being hidden away by 3 fairies, the curse comes true. Years later, Prince Philip fights through thorns, slays a dragon, and awakens her with a gentle kiss. They live happily ever after. This narrative was shaped by the Brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault, but they were both adapting a much older, more disturbing Italian tale written by Giambattista Basili in 1634, called Sun, Moon, and Talia. It makes Maleficent's curse look like a mild inconvenience. In this version, after a prophecy that a splinter of flax will endanger the Princess Talia, her father bans all flax from the house. But of course, she encounters an old woman spinning, pricks her finger, and falls down as if dead. Her devastated father, unable to bury her, leaves her in an abandoned country estate. So far, so familiar. But this is where the story takes an incredibly dark turn. Sometime later, a king is hunting nearby and follows his falcon into the silent house. He finds the beautiful, sleeping Talia. He tries to wake her, but can't. What happens next is not a kiss. Basile writes that the king, overcome by her beauty, carries her to a bed and gathers the first fruits of love. He assaults the unconscious princess, leaves her there, and returns to his kingdom, forgetting all about her. 9 months later, while still asleep, Talia gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Fairies appear to care for the newborns. One day, one of the babies, searching for its mother's breast, begins to suck on her finger and draws out the flax splinter. Just like that, Talia awakens to find herself alone with 2 infants she has no memory of. She names them Sun and Moon. Meanwhile, the king finally remembers Talia and returns. He is shocked to find her awake with his 2 children. A strange sort of love blossoms. The complication? The king is already married. His wife, the queen, becomes suspicious when he starts muttering Talia, Sun, and Moon in his sleep. Enraged, she learns the truth and concocts a monstrous revenge. She sends a message to lure the children to the castle, where she orders the cook to kill them and serve them to the king for dinner. The kind-hearted cook can't do it and hides the children, substituting lamb instead. The king enjoys the meal, while the queen taunts him, "Eat up, for you are eating what is your own." Next, the queen summons Talia, intending to burn her alive on a bonfire. As Talia's cries of agony fill the air, the king rushes in. Learning the full extent of his wife's horrific plot, he orders the queen to be thrown into the fire instead. With his murderous wife now ashes, the king marries Talia, and they live, as the story concludes, happily ever after. It's a shocking tale of assault and attempted cannibalism, where the happily ever after is built on a foundation of unimaginable trauma. A curious young mermaid named Ariel falls in love with a human, Prince Eric, after saving him from a shipwreck. She trades her voice to the sea witch, Ursula, for human legs, needing to get true love's kiss within 3 days. After a climactic battle, her father transforms her into a human. She marries the prince, and everyone celebrates. This is the Disney classic, but the original 1837 story by Hans Christian Andersen is not a romance. It's a profoundly sad and painful story about sacrifice, unrequited love, and the longing for an immortal soul. In Andersen's tale, the mermaid's desire to be human is twofold. Yes, she loves the prince, but more importantly, she learns that mermaids simply dissolve into sea foam when they die after 300 years. Humans, however, have eternal souls. The only way for a mermaid to gain a soul is to have a human love and marry her. This desperation drives her to the sea witch. The deal is horrific. The witch literally cuts out the mermaid's tongue. The potion for her legs is excruciating, and every step she takes will feel like walking on sharp knives. And the stakes are infinitely higher. If the prince marries someone else, she won't just be a slave. The next morning, her heart will break and she will dissolve into sea foam, ceasing to exist. She accepts. The prince is captivated by her beauty and graceful dancing, which she performs despite agonizing pain. But he treats her like a cherished child, not a romantic partner, even having her sleep on a cushion outside his door. He is fond of her, but his true love is reserved for a princess from another kingdom, whom he mistakenly believes saved him. He confides in the mermaid how happy he is to be marrying this other woman, completely oblivious that his wedding is her death sentence. On the wedding night, as the mermaid waits for the sunrise that will end her existence, her sisters appear. They've given their hair to the sea witch in exchange for an enchanted knife. If the mermaid kills the prince and lets his blood touch her feet, she can become a mermaid again. She takes the knife and enters his tent. She looks at the man she sacrificed everything for, but she can't do it. She kisses him, throws the dagger into the sea, and leaps overboard, feeling her body dissolve into foam. But Andersen offers a bittersweet consolation. She doesn't cease to exist. Because of her selfless act, she becomes a daughter of the air, an ethereal spirit. She is given the chance to earn an immortal soul through 300 years of good deeds. It's a tragic, lonely ending. She never gets the prince. Her sacrifice is rewarded not with love, but with a form of spiritual purgatory. It's a story not about getting your dream, but about the profound pain of it remaining forever out of reach. So why the dramatic shift? Why did tales of cannibalism, mutilation, and assault become the sweet stories we tell our children? The evolution of these stories is a mirror reflecting huge changes in society and our very perception of childhood. The original folk tales came from a time of brutal hardship. Life was short, famine was common, and dangers were everywhere. The stories reflected that. They were stark, pragmatic warnings, disguised as entertainment, meant to teach survival and enforce social norms through fear. As societies civilized, the sensibilities of the upper classes began to shape the narratives. Collectors, like Charles Perrault, wrote for aristocratic adults, polishing the gritty peasant folklore into more elegant tales with clear morals. The biggest shift, though, came in the 19th century, with a new, idealized vision of childhood. The Victorians championed the idea of childhood innocence, a protected sphere separate from adult life. Bedtime stories became a soothing ritual. Gory, terrifying tales were no longer appropriate. The Brothers Grimm themselves, under pressure, began editing later editions of their collection, removing some of the most graphic content. And then, in the 20th century, came Walt Disney. The Disney Company built a brand on a specific formula of magic, romance, and unambiguous happy endings. To become a Disney film, these stories had to be stripped of darkness, moral ambiguity, and tragic conclusions. The villains had to be pure evil, the heroes purely good, and love had to conquer all. Ariel had to get her prince. Cinderella's family was simply forgotten, not blinded, and Sleeping Beauty had to be awakened by a chaste, heroic kiss. These stories changed because we changed. They evolved from brutal warnings about the world's dangers to comforting assurances that everything will be all right in the end. It's pretty shocking to see just how much these stories have been transformed. From horror-filled cautionary tales to the feel-good fables we know today, their journey tells us as much about our history as the stories themselves. If you enjoyed having your childhood delicately ruined and want more deep dives into the messed up origins of your favorite stories, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments which of these original stories shocked you the most. The cannibalism in Little Red Riding Hood? The self-mutilation in Cinderella? The assault in Sleeping Beauty? Or the tragic sacrifice of the Little Mermaid? I'd love to hear what you think. So the next time you see a glass slipper, a red cloak, or a spinning wheel, maybe you'll remember the shadows that lurk behind them. These are more than just simple tales. They are cultural artifacts, passed down through generations, with each change telling us something about the people who told them, what they feared, what they valued, and how they saw the world. The sanitized versions comfort us, but the originals remind us that happily ever after was once a concept that had to be earned through blood, tears, and unimaginable hardship. Thanks for watching.